very welcome to, thank you. Very welcome to today's AI Think Tank. This is event number 2 in our AI checklist series called Bias and Ethical AI, organized by us, the students at AI Business Consultant Program at Hyper Island, in collaboration with AI Sweden and Hyper Island itself. My name is Levi Sass, and I will moderate today's think tank. Some of you might wonder, what are we all about and what are the events all about? To answer that question, we have prepared a video to explain what we do and what we are trying to achieve. And we will show it to you now.
Hello there. We are so happy to welcome you to the AI Think Tank. You might be wondering what this event is all about. Well, we want you, business leaders, tech enthusiasts, and the curious to learn about AI. The AI Think Tank is a collaboration between a team of AI business consultant students from Hyper Island together with AI Sweden. Our mission is to connect people, spread awareness of AI, how it can help your businesses, and spark your interest. We invite AI leaders to share their knowledge and bring inspiration about different topics and applications of AI. For an hour, you will be able to connect by creating this event, meet new people who share the same interest and curiosity, discuss by creating discussion rooms where you can share your thoughts, ideas, and potential use cases, innovate by learning from our invited AI leaders and the tools that will be shared. You will become AI aware and potentially get new ideas to solve your business challenges. Let's get started.
So now that you know more about the purpose and the value we want you to have from this event, we would like to do a waterfall check-in together with you, just to see the general feel of the room. So I invite you to write in the chat, but wait with pressing send until my cue. And please answer this question from 0 to 10. How much do you consider bias and ethical issues related to your business or field? So write your answer in the chat and go. They're pretty high. I would say an average of 7, maybe. So to move on, today's agenda will look something like this. We have a guest with us named Jesse Shanahan, who will be presenting soon. Then at 25 past, we will have some breakout rooms where we encourage you to connect and discuss with other participants that will not be recorded. Then we will join the big room again, discuss some main topics, insights that everybody got, and we will have a hard stop at 2 o'clock. So to move on, I will present you our guest speaker by the name of Jesse Shanahan. She has an academic background in applied linguistics and astrophysics, and she holds a patent for cybersecurity applications of machine learning. Jesse is a machine learning developer with a focus on humanitarian uses of AI and AI ethics. She currently works at Peltarion, a Swedish AI startup with a mission to democratize AI. Being an avid science communicator, her publications were featured in Science Magazine, Forbes, and Astronomy Magazine. While she has many hobbies outside her work, including a Twitch channel devoted to science and education, and you have the links here on the slide, and feel free to follow her. So with that said, I hand it over to Jesse. Welcome to today's AI Think Tank.
Thank you. And give me 1 second here to share my screen. Okay. And I will present. All right, so hopefully you all can see the first slide.
We can see the screen.
Excellent, good. All right. Well, welcome everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about bias and ethics in artificial intelligence. And I have to say, I loved all of the responses to that initial poll because I was anticipating actually lower responses. Usually when I talk about bias and ethics, there's a feeling of, oh, this doesn't really apply to me or my industry. And so I was going to say that I hope I can raise the numbers that you were putting in chat. And by the end, you'll all be convinced that bias and ethics are pretty much applicable to every industry, but you all kind of apparently already know that. So that is wonderful. You already know the about me because of that wonderful introduction, but I will share this very cute picture of my dog, and there are more dog photos later on. But broadly speaking, I think what I'm trying to get across with my background is that I balance a technical background that is academic with a lot of focus on communication and advocacy. And so I think these are really, really important for bias and ethics in ML specifically, because you need a little bit of a technical ability to evaluate models and what's going on. And you kind of also need to be able to hopefully communicate about your results. So, but now to the interesting stuff. What is AI ethics? And I think this is a question that I get asked very, very frequently. And while I'm going to kind of cover a little bit of maybe a dictionary definition, this is a constantly changing field, and it's very, very interdisciplinary. So everything we talk about today, everything that I share with you, is under this broader scope of AI ethics and technology ethics as well. So ethics is, according to the dictionary at least, a study of the concepts of right and wrong, particularly when applied to human behavior. Now it's really, really general, and it still, I think, is pretty general when you look at the definition of AI ethics, which is a branch of ethics that's concerned with finding the beneficial uses for AI, such as identifying and avoiding sources of harm, determining what ethical development would look like or mean, and looking at the research, production, use, and evaluation of AI from that ethical lens. But honestly, I still found this vague. And even though I work in this field and do research in this field, I felt like that definition didn't fully encompass what AI ethics is really about. In contrast, there was this study in Nature Machine Intelligence that found 11 categories of ethical principles that are related to AI. I think this is a little bit more specific and hopefully will illuminate some of what AI ethics is about. So they found fairness and justice, responsibility, privacy, transparency, freedom and autonomy, solidarity, dignity, non-maleficence, beneficence, trust, and sustainability. But you might also kind of be asking what are the issues then in AI ethics? When you hear something like solidarity, what does that even mean when it comes to what we talk about and what we work on? So other issues in AI ethics, and by no means everything I share here, I have to impress upon you, this is such a broad field and the issues are complex and growing, unfortunately. So none of my lists of things are meant to be all exclusive. But some of the issues in AI ethics are, issues of surveillance, particularly autonomous surveillance, privacy, so how people's data is being used, how it's being gathered, bias, which is what we'll be focusing on today, the manipulation of human behavior. So one of the things that I like to share with people is that something even as seemingly innocent as the order that you get your Google results in can have an impact. In the United States, there was a study, can impact voting patterns by up to 30%, just the order that you get those results in. And so how human behavior is influenced by these quiet, subtle AI that kind of shape the world around us, that's a huge issue in AI ethics. Autonomous decision-making. Should decisions be autonomous? Should AI models make decisions at all? If so, what kind of accountability and oversight should we have for those autonomous decisions? Human rights, obviously, another massive, massive field. AI law, how do we regulate? How do we create legislation and standards around the use and development of AI? And accountability. And I'll talk a little bit more about accountability later, but essentially it boils down to when an AI model inevitably makes a mistake, whose responsibility is that and how do we handle it? So hopefully now you have a stronger idea of what AI ethics is. And my next slide, I made a bit of an argument for why you should care about AI ethics, but hopefully it looks like, again, from that poll that all of you are already on board. But I do want to share with you some of these motivations. So in the center of the slide, you're going to see two images, and these are from Google Cloud Platform's image labeling service. And you can see that this is a digital thermometer that they use to take, take your temperature, see if you have a fever. And on the left, the exact same tool in the hand of a white person is labeled adequately tool, but in the hand of a Black person is labeled a gun. And so you can hopefully get a sense already for how this could be deeply problematic. But it's not enough to just say, oh, that's wrong, we should fix it. There's inherently, humans should understand and be able to trust the tools and technology that we use. Explainability, transparency, human-centered design, and these are things I'll talk about in more detail later, but these can help to build trust, in addition to regulations, legislation, and industry standards. Now, in terms of impact, the use and development of technology in general is not neutral. All technology has potential harms and potential benefits. So one example of this that I think is very revealing is the internet. And the internet's this amazing technology, right? And has incredible benefits. But also, it's accelerated the decline of endangered and indigenous languages. It's enabled bullying, harassment, and doxing on a huge scale. And it's contributed to the spread of dis and misinformation. So every technology, there are pros and cons, there are benefits and harms. And so analyzing the impact and trying to mitigate those harms is a really important part of AI ethics. Also, if that wasn't enough, it's smart business. Any business that creates, develops, uses, or integrates AI, your users, your stakeholders, your business decision makers are going to want to understand how AI works and how it's being used. Unethical AI is bad AI, and it can harm a business. It can undermine customer trust, it can impact your revenue, and it can ruin business reputations. Also, I have no idea. Can you all see the yellow line that just appeared? Well, I have no idea what that is. I didn't touch it. So we're just, it's a creative addition to the slide. It's a bit odd. Also, in addition to being smart business, if you're coming at this more from the perspective of a researcher, then I would argue ethics is good science. Unethical AI is bad science, whether the issue is with a data set or the model, or maybe the idea for the project in the first place. Reliability, reproducibility, informed consent, explainability, these are all parts of not only ethics, but they're key parts of the scientific process as well. And they're standards that we as scientists should hold ourselves to. Now, I've been talking a lot about risks and harms, and a huge part of that is safety. So AI has a massive potential to benefit humanity, but that also means that it carries significant risk for harm. And I think there are certain industries where that harm is a lot more obvious. So you can think of healthcare, self-driving cars, and similar applications, but safety should be a priority and part of kind of an ethical framework, regardless of the application in the industry. And I think there is this misconception, unfortunately, that, my industry isn't one of these high-risk industries, so ethics and bias don't apply to me. And, safety isn't a big concern because I don't see the way I could harm people. But, the perfect example of this are those automated hand drying appliances in bathrooms, and they often fail to work on, darker skin. And that might seem okay, it's not costing somebody their life, it's not a car hitting somebody, but that still is subtle ways that certain groups of people feel excluded and marginalized and shut out of the tools and technology that start to make society more accessible. And so whether it's your bathroom dryer or it's a self-driving car, safety is really important, as are taking, an ethics-driven development perspective. And this is my favorite argument, honestly, of all my slides. This is the slide I struggled the most with, because for me, the "it's the right thing to do" argument is enough, but finding those additional motivations, saying, why is this important beyond just "it's the right thing to do," but also it's the right thing to do. We should build, use, and legislate technology in alignment with our values and in respect of human rights. So I mentioned that I'll be focusing a little bit on bias. Oh my gosh, that thing is still there. Hold on, I'm gonna see if I can remove it. I have no idea.
You should be able to click on clear annotation.
Yeah, there's a pencil
Aha.
down there on my screen, I guess. And the person who did it, if you click on that, there's a
Clear all
trash can
drawings.
icon.
Okay,
Or yeah,
there we go.
Nice.
Yep, thank you. That was, I have no idea how that happened because my mouse wasn't anywhere near that. But I am kind of juggling the Zoom panel as well. Let me see if I can minimize that. Perfect. Okay. So some common types of bias. Now, again, I picked some common ones, but please, by no means should you consider this some exhaustive list. But these are a few that are easy to understand and unfortunately easy to spot. So selection bias, the selection of data that is not properly randomized or not gathered uniformly. Okay, what does that mean? It means that there's a mismatch between the data that's selected and reality. So one example of this that's a little more subtle is when you send out a survey and it's a voluntary survey. You aren't necessarily sampling your whole population. You're not actually getting responses from everyone. You're getting responses from the people that volunteer for surveys. And so in a way, you have to be mindful of that selection bias and what data is being used. Does it actually represent reality? Where are the gaps? Who might not have access, for example, if you're requiring the use of certain technology to collect the data, like smartphones? Not everyone has access to a smartphone. So you'll, unintentionally be excluding certain groups of the population in your data set. There's also automation bias, and this is one that comes up a lot in my work, but this is the tendency for human beings to prefer outcomes from automated systems and to follow automated processes, even if they probably shouldn't. And there are numerous examples of this, especially in the healthcare industry, with a lot of the automated electronic health record systems. There's a lot of examples of kind of automation bias. I would encourage you, if you're considering AI, to ask yourself, should this be automated? Does this need AI? And the answer might be yes, but it's important to be mindful of the fact that just because it came from an automated system doesn't mean that one, it's 100% objective, and two, that it's flawless. AI systems make mistakes just as humans do, and it's important to not kind of privilege the results from that more than you would from human processes. There's also confirmation bias. This one is a tough one. I think everyone kind of falls victim to this from time to time, but in particular, I see this a lot in the development of AI, where we tend to favor data, models, outcomes that confirm the things we think we already know. And this could be a well-intentioned data scientist picking the model that gives them the result they want, regardless of maybe what the data indicates. It could be a decision maker getting a decision from an AI model that is flawed, but because it confirms something the decision maker already thought, they don't question it and they go with it. And so this is a really, really important bias to examine in AI and kind of build processes and solutions for addressing. Another one, this one, I spend a lot of time talking about this one, the default effect. And so this in particular with developers and data scientists it's the tendency for people to choose the default options or parameters. And so you can think about this maybe when that pop-up with cookies comes up on a website and you just kind of say, accept all, and you don't spend time looking at what those default options are. In AI, it also affects the parameters of the model, what models are chosen. There's a tendency to just go with whatever the default is, particularly if you're working with some kind of UI. And this can lead to all kinds of problems because the default options might not be the best options. And if you unquestioningly select them and just go with it, you're going to run into a lot of issues. There's also historical bias, and this one in particular is incredibly important. So I believe that, the standard definition for this is when the data used to train the model no longer reflects reality. So maybe you are, if you train a language model on books from 500 years ago, it's going to, have a model of language that is antiquated. But I would also add that historical bias includes when that data perpetuates existing societal inequities. So society is not perfect, no matter how much we wish it was. But if we have a mismatch, right? If there are problems in society, we don't want to have our systems, our autonomous systems, perpetuate those problems. So using data unquestioningly without, examining it for evidence of those inequities and just feeding it right into an AI model, you can have an AI model that, well, it's accurate because it's reflecting reality, but reality is flawed, and maybe the reality of modern society is something we wish was better. And lastly, this is also a very important one. They're all really important. I feel like I could say that about every form of bias, but so bias laundering in particular, if you are a business person, if you are a decision maker or a stakeholder in an AI business, this is incredibly important. So bias laundering is the illusion that algorithms can't be biased or they can't be problematic, and because they're objective. And it's data, right? So it's logical, it's science. It can't be flawed. And this is very, very dangerous because one example of this is Compass in the United States. So this was a model used to predict the recidivism rate of formerly incarcerated people. And the problem is that this, the system started to make predictions about people's likelihood to commit crimes again. And of course, you can imagine that model had some really serious bias issues. But the problem was, by having the AI generate the results, by having it come from a mathematical model, people thought, oh, it has to be objective, right? This is based on fact. So it was a little bit of a combination actually of historical bias and bias laundering. So this is definitely something to be aware of. And if I haven't impressed upon you at this point the importance of bias in ethics, I have a couple of case studies that I wanted to share with you. So the first one is Amazon, and this is a really famous one. So if you kind of Google probably like AI bias examples, I'm sure that this is one that comes up frequently, made the headlines. So Amazon had a resume review process they wanted to automate. So they built a model and they trained it on the resumes of what they considered successful employees, so on the teams that they had already. So hopefully there's a red flag in your brain going historical bias. But the resulting model, because those teams were predominantly male, the resulting model disqualified any candidates who had women's colleges or women's organizations on their resume. So perpetuating existing problems. Similarly, Optum. So I wasn't totally familiar with this company, but the use case is a really powerful one. So they designed an algorithm which aimed to predict which patients would need extra care as part of the healthcare triage process. And unfortunately, it was already used on over 200 million people by the time they realized it favored white patients. And the developers said, well, we removed race as a variable, so we thought it was fine. Unfortunately, race was highly correlated with another variable that was included, which was healthcare cost. So another example of, and a very impactful example of bias in AI. And of course, Google. So in 2015, the Google image recognition program was mislabeling Black faces as gorillas. And 4 years later, it still hadn't been fixed. So they just removed the gorilla label entirely. And, it's a little bit of a Band-Aid fix. It's not really addressing the underlying problem. So 2020, Google, the image labeling algorithm I showed you earlier, labeling a thermometer in a Black hand as a gun. And so clearly, the issues of bias in their image labeling model, they haven't really addressed that. And finally, LinkedIn. So LinkedIn's recommendation algorithm was ranking candidates based on how likely they were to apply for a job. And so as a result, it started to recommend more men than women, because men were more aggressive in applying for roles, regardless of, the match with experience and requirements. And some of these you might go, okay, I see how these perpetuate stereotypes, or they have bias, but it's not really life and death. And so I have two more, a little more sobering examples. So one is in the UK, the NHS Babylon app. 2 patients with the same age and medical histories reported chest pain. One got told it was anxiety and the other a heart attack. And the difference was gender. So the patient that got told it was anxiety was a woman, and the patient that got told it was a heart attack was a man. Similarly, OpenAI's GPT-3 was powering a medical chatbot and told the patient to go ahead and kill themselves after they expressed, suicidal feelings. So again, questions of, should this be automated? What is the oversight? What is the data being used? And it can, unfortunately, become an issue of life and death. So there is a common misconception that, oh, it's the data that's biased, not the algorithm. Well, I'm the bearer of bad news. Bias can arise throughout the entire machine learning workflow. So whether it's the very conception of the project, or the data gathering, the data processing, the model selection, bias can arise every single step of the way. And I have some guided questions here. So if you see, oh, I don't see how data processing could have bias, some of these questions are designed to get you thinking about, well, actually bias can arise. Ethical problems can arise at every single step of the AI development workflow. Similarly, the last steps of the workflow, training and validation, evaluation, inference and deployment, still ethical problems and bias can arise at every single step in this process, which is why there's a really strong need for having processes and policies in place to address this. So lastly, I don't want to, this has been a whirlwind tour of ethics and bias, and honestly, I could talk about this for hours, but I won't, because I will be mindful of our time. But I don't want to leave you just with the problems. And I think this is another issue that I see a lot in the ethics field, is that we focus so much on identifying the problem, but that's not enough. We have to have practical solutions and ways of addressing it. And so here are some approaches, solutions that, if you are struggling with ethics issues when it comes to AI, here are some things to consider. So the first, of course, is explainability. Can you explain how the model arrived at the results? Do you understand what aspects of the data contributed to the outcome? And has this been communicated to key stakeholders and users and documented, hopefully? And do the people that are making use of that AI, using it in their daily work, do they understand how it uses data to generate results? And I mentioned accountability earlier. It really comes down to who is responsible when things go wrong. Is it the developer? Is it the organization? Is it the platform? Is it the data gatherers, data labelers? So many people are involved in the development, training, and deployment of AI that you need to have an accountability framework for when things go wrong. Monitoring is incredibly important. And I have a couple things to monitor for here. So data drift. This is when the inputs to the model have deviated from what the model was trained on. An example of this is in cybersecurity. You could train a model on people's normal, patterns of behavior on their computer. And you can imagine that if people change roles, or you add a new team to your business, or something else shifts, that suddenly their behavior could change, and it might look anomalous, but actually it's not. Concept drift. So this is when the relationship between the inputs and the outputs has changed. So unlike the previous data drift where the data's changed, this is where the fundamental relationship linking those inputs and those outputs has changed. An example would be if I created a model predicting customer purchasing patterns based on their historical trends, and then a global pandemic happens. Something has fundamentally changed between their purchasing patterns and how it can predict how they're going to behave in the future. And the next one, this is my favorite, I think. Well, they're all kind of my favorite, but education is incredibly important. So whether it's data scientists and developers moving beyond default bias and needing to truly understand and have mindful selection of parameters and justified complexity, or it's users needing to understand not the calculus of how the model works, but how their data is being used, how the model makes decisions, and what the potential errors might look like. Or business leaders needing to understand the buzzwords, needing to distinguish between what is marketing hype and what is actual business value. And this requires a knowledge of the limitations, the risks, the potential harms, and the requirements for successful AI. And I think one of the other things that requires a little bit of a paradigm shift is human-centric development. And so I hear too often, oh, this paper came out, this is a great model. What are some things we can use it for? When really it should be, well, we have this problem. What are the model tasks that could help us with this problem? Having that kind of use case oriented development instead of just liking a model and wanting to shove it into a particular situation. Now, privacy and security, this could be an entire talk on its own. So I won't go too much in depth because I will run out of the few minutes I have left. But a couple of principles to keep in mind. So informed consent. Did people consent to having their data used? Do they understand what their data is being used for? Do they understand how the AI system is integrated into the tool or product that they're using? Has the data been collected on people that maybe weren't the original target of the data gathering? That becomes incredibly important in surveillance. Data persistence and repurposing. So is the data being kept longer than people consented to? Is it being used for a purpose other than the original purpose? Regulatory compliance, of course, as legislation kind of catches up to technology, these will become increasingly more important, but there are pretty strict standards already for personal health information and PII. And lastly, data governance, disclosure, stewardship, all of these issues, like I said, this is an entire field unto itself. And so by no means think that these four things that I briefly covered, or three things, are the whole of it. So if you're interested in this, I would encourage you definitely to dive deeper. And lastly, a really practical piece of advice. Ethical use and development of AI cannot be founded on just intent alone. Policies and standards, these have to be implemented to ensure that all of these solutions and principles are properly applied. So this kind of ethics policy would be incredibly interdisciplinary, which is challenging, but it does cover all aspects of business. I think I've impressed upon you the importance of having ethics-driven development for the data scientists, but say your marketing team, they should have policies ensuring transparency and accuracy instead of falling victim to clickbait or misleading advertising. Decision makers should have an ethics policy for managing risk, oversight, monitoring, and for accountability. And this could go so much further. It is a comprehensive and it's a big task, but it's a critically important one, particularly if you decide to make that policy public, which in the interest of transparency, I would encourage you to. But so I wish I could keep telling you all about ethics and bias, and I feel like I've barely scratched the surface. But yeah, I would love to take any questions, or I think we might go to breakout rooms now. If you'd like to keep in touch, please feel free to reach out or connect with me, and also admire my extremely cute dogs.
Thank you, Jesse, for a great presentation, really valuable content. And I love that you ended with solutions, what we actually can do to make a dent in this topic. So this is a huge topic, and I wish we had more time. Right now, we will jump to breakout rooms, where we would like you to share ideas, insights based on what we've heard, and also from your personal experience. So there will not be any recordings in the breakout sessions. It is just you and a couple more participants. You will have 1 or 2 facilitators in the room moderating the question, and your role is just to be present, enjoy, listen, maybe share. And if it is possible, please make sure to turn on your microphones and cameras. And we will meet back here at 50. So 1 and 50. Thank you, Jesse, again, and see you in a couple of minutes. We hope you had interesting discussions, maybe new connections, and maybe even new insights that were shared in the room. And we would love to hear some voices. Does anybody want to share something that came up?
I can start. In our room, there was a question raised about the regulations. Who should start talking about AI ethics, and should it start with the company or like the government implementing, like you should consider AI ethics? So that's kind of our discussion.
It's a really interesting question. I would argue, like with most meaningful change, that it's both. It's everyone. And there needs to be a grassroots effort from the bottom up. So your everyday business people, marketers, data scientists, developers, but then you also need that top down. You need kind of the governmental regulations and legislation around AI. So I think that unfortunately that legislation often lags behind technology. And so that's not, a free-for-all freedom to be unethical while we wait for kind of our laws to catch up. But it does mean that both are needed. You need kind of the individual, you need the organizational or business level, and then you also need the governmental level as well.
Any other?
I mean, I can pose slightly with that, because in our room, Sophie posed a question about so clients that are wanting to have a little, perhaps too much control over some rules and stuff involving the AI that was going to be implemented. So Philip from our room also suggested a number of methods that would be useful to kind of help control that. And then it was also suggested that perhaps curbing the expectations of the client in that sense, and saying this comes back to that question of, is AI possibly the right or the wrong answer for this particular problem? Because if they're truly desiring to have this additional control over the data or the privacy or whatever, then perhaps it's actually not the right thing to be implemented for them.
It's a really interesting point. I think, of course, privacy, data privacy in particular, is paramount. I would say that discussion of, is AI the best fit tool for this particular problem? One, it really helps when you have a solution-oriented approach. So this is, my client has a problem and I'm going to help them solve it, not I have an AI, I want to solve problems with my AI. So if you actually focus on the problem, then a whole host of approaches becomes available to you. You aren't limiting yourself just to some massive architecture. I do think that there are many, many cases where AI is not the best fit, but I do recognize that, especially for for-profit businesses that are marketing AI products or AI development, consulting agencies, this is a huge challenge because you need enough hype that people want to buy your product and they want to buy your services, but you don't want so much hype that they think that AI is going to, solve world peace and they're just going to sit back and with 5 data points, you can make magic happen. So it's a lot, like you said, about managing expectations and having that realistic conversation that is problem and solution oriented instead of technology oriented.
Thank you for sharing. Those were really interesting points of view. We need to move on. Our time is nearly up and we have some announcements to make. So this has been part 2 of our AI checklist series. We have 2 more planned. One will be in April and another one in May. And if you're interested, please join the community. You can find us on Instagram and also LinkedIn. Just search AI Think Tank and you will find us. And then before checkout, I just want to thank the AI Think Tank crew and our facilitators for today's event. And a big, big thank you to Jesse for being here with us. It has really been amazing to listen to your presentation. And thank you very much. So as a checkout, please go over to the chat and just write a couple of words or one word. What are your key takeaways from today's event? And then whenever you want, you can just click enter.
And of course, if anyone has, they want to continue the conversation, all of my various social media and avenues of talking to me, we shared earlier, and I will be working with the wonderful folks at the AI Think Tank to make the slides available for you as well. So I'll make those public so you can have them as a reference.
Great. We can share those slides with every participant
Perfect.
At the date. We will do that. We have some interesting takeaways. Education. Unethical AI is bad AI. Really, really good one.
Glad I got that one across.
Yeah, my key takeaway was what you said was build, use, and legislate technology so that they are correlated with our values. That will be my key takeaway, and thank you for that. So thank you everyone for joining. Have a great Tuesday and have a great rest of the week. And hope to see you in about a month at our next AI Think Tank, which will be about AI and user cases. Thank you very much and have a great day.
Jesse.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, and big thank you, Jesse.
Thank
you.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Jess.
You. Great job, everyone.
Okay, we are